So anytime, anywhere, I got bingles and annoyed, so I had to go and respond to things because that's what I did. But that let us put limits on purpose. If we can find out what people are doing, understand what they're doing, monitor them, and see breaches where people are going beyond what they're allowed to do, we can stop it. Why fairness? What do you think fairness has to do with privacy? No takers? Yeah, so we have data rights for things, and they're not just ours. And when we're sharing information, we have to think from both parties' perspective. So if I'm a corporation and I require data, then I have certain limitations on what I can do. But within those limitations, if it's part of what I've done and you've agreed or even got a discount or had a service for it, then it's fair that I can use it. It's part of the way I don't like Google and Facebook and things like this, because you sign up and there's no way of paying Google to use their service, or even if you do, I've got a commercial account, then they still bypass it and use your information anyway. Fairness means you should be able to negotiate between the parties as to what each party can and can't do. And different parties will have different rights, depending on what they've agreed. An overlooked one, and lawfulness. So, anonymity doesn't include lawfulness. Privacy does. You have no right to privacy to go and plot the overthrow of the government. Whether you like it or not, too bad. If you're successful, you can change the rules, but that's because in a Hobbesian or post-Hobbesian world, when you're successful, you're the ruler. And Hobbes would say, well, you were always the sovereign. Yeah, Hobbes is a bit silly that way. You're not allowed to do it, but if you did, it's okay. Yeah. So, lawfulness. What do you think that actually represents? So, in 2006, I was involved with the South Australian Police in a social media case. Iggy, who worked with me in BDO, and myself developed network algorithms to analyse different identities and de-anonymise them across social media, so that we could watch tracks of communications, IP addresses, and using machine learning technologies, work out that basically these 100 identities are the same person. Fun stuff. Trolls on Twitter think they get away with this. We were doing this in 2006. In that case, it was to do with child grooming. In that, what we were looking for is communication patterns for 30 to 40-year-old men who wanted to talk to 13-year-old girls. That's not lawful. But us breaching your privacy as part of that, when a judge has signed off on the warrant, is. Why do you think that's right? And what controls do you think need to be around this?
In the US, we have reasonable suspicion and probable cause,
Hmm.
which are essential in the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments.
Mm-hmm.
But it also largely only is understood within the US, UK, probably Germanic, Austrian, and Jewish context, but
Yes.
not in Latin America, Africa.
Yeah, Latin America is very different. Unfortunately, they're sort of a Spanish Roman law derivative, and very authoritarian. So it derives from the Spanish sort of idea of centralized control, and I'm not a big fan of it, so I can't say that one, but I quite like common law type systems and the controls that they have, and the whole misapplied post-Magna Carta idea that got in after the Civil War here in England that basically gives everyone a whole lot of rights
So how does lawfulness operates on a global context where 90% of the countries does not have common law, if they have any type of law?
So what we're going to have to do is monitor things like location and source when we're looking at what people are doing. Then governments are going to have to actually start acting to control some of this. They can. So we can allow access, but ISPs should be putting blocks on things like child pornography at borders. Now, there are differences to what is and isn't. If you look at somewhere like the Netherlands, they're quite open, way too open in my opinion, and they go right down to 13-year-olds are okay. That's probably why Austin Powers makes fun of people in Belgium and Netherlands, but that's a different issue. So when we're talking about this, we have to think about what government should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. And right now, many of them just do the too hard basket when it's not that hard. You can actually implement these controls at the ISP, and occasionally they do. It usually happens because of corporations. So a lot of the controls over peer-to-peer happened because of the RIA, like Record Industry Association of America and others, who not only lobbied the government, but started civil lawsuits. And people don't understand, but you can actually start criminal lawsuits civilly, and usually what happens is the government, if they're any good, takes them over and kicks you out, which is probably a good thing because then you stop paying the money. But you can also work with the police and actually make sure these things are there and build the case for them. So it goes back to, in many instances, we need people in society, companies and others to start being responsible as well. So if like the ISPs in a country start acting responsibly, they can actually preempt some of these things. And I'm sorry, but if there are known databases, and there are, of malware, of illicit sites, of things like drug sites and other things, Tor access points to them, of Tor files related to these things, I actually think it should just be blocked at the ISP level. And you can say, oh, my right to XYZ. I'm sorry, if you're living in Britain, you don't have a right to child pornography. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a right to illegal access to illegal goods. So, rather than doing that, we should communicate, and part of democratic process is we should be talking about these things openly and saying why that's not a problem. Why do we have these rules? Because we're in a democracy that voted for these rules. If you don't like them, get up there, become a politician, rant and rave, do a sort of Thurman type thing and go, I'm so ashamed of society, and rant and rave and say how terrible everything is, and then fly home on your private jet and complain. So, getting back to the real point, lawfulness, at least in British, American, other societies, is going to link into a belief of what the majority of the people, for the most of the time, think is right. And that's not always right, but that's why we should have open discourse. Not trolling, that's not open discourse, but arguments about these issues. And why should we block things and why shouldn't we block things? This is the stuff we really need to be talking about. What are we actually controlling? Why are we controlling it? What sort of things should be filtered by a society? And every society has the right to choose themselves. And Texas is going to be very different than California. Just are, because if you've been to each of those, you will know Texans and Californians are very different people. They might be both American, but they're very different people. So, lawfulness matters. So, what do you think some of this access right is going to mean if we start having records maintained for a while? Think about it for a moment. If we can start doing things like recording the hash of a file, such as child pornography, and then recording access rights even at the ISP and things like this, to different files. After the event matters as well. So if 3 years ago you happened to download 100,000 child porn images over a 2-year period, and now, in the future, one of those shows up, and one of those files, and the hash of that file is now discovered by police who have raided someone else. Do you think they have a right to access that material on you? So these are the things we need to discuss on privacy. And I have my opinion, but I'm one person. And I do vote, not on every election. Some of them are worth more than others, especially the local council ones. I couldn't really care. Definitely can't care. This is England. Local councils are a joke half the time. Anyway, it is. So, lawfulness. Is that going to be lawful? Technically, it's going to depend on the law in the jurisdiction you're in. If you want a society that stops people doing things, do you think that's a deterrent for crime? Yes or no? If you can be pulled up 5 years after the event and that crime you committed 5 years ago can be held against you, is that a deterrent?
Yes.
So I believe these things matter. I think there's probably a limit on what you can do as well. I don't think someone should be able to pull you up 40 years down the track. As for some crimes, you can be, because it's really hard to defend yourself 40 years later, even if there's really solid evidence against you that might be something mitigating. So, law is one of the key differentiators between privacy and anonymity. And no one wants to talk about this in cryptocurrency world. But that word matters. And when they talk about privacy coins, lawfulness is part of privacy. So they will use the word privacy coin when what they mean is anonymous illicit use coin. Different. So, transparency, translucent. So, you do.
Yeah, I have a question, because you said that we should speak about all this, and this is obviously your opinion. With who should we speak about that? Who would be invited, should be invited to give their opinion? Who could change this?
So, I happen to have a postgraduate qualification in political science, so I'm an opinionated prick. It's very simple. Everyone in society should be engaged, and if they don't want to be, don't bitch. That's my answer. The early days here in Britain, the early days in America, involved these things called coffee shops, which also usually sold alcohol. Here in England we sold gin, in America they sold whiskey, rum and other things, and coffee was much more exciting back in the day. And people would have arguments and debates. And Germany tried to ban coffee shops. Literally. The Prussians didn't like them because all these horrible people keep debating politics when all they want to do is tell them what to do. And they keep arguing. So the Kaiser wanted to try and ban coffee shops because people kept talking about politics. That's a good thing. We should be talking about politics, and we should be openly discussing, not the bipartisan bullshit where we sit on either side of the fence and yell at each other and argue, but real debates. Things like abortion should be discussed. And yes, we all have opinions, and they're like arseholes. Everyone's got one. But that's not the point. Your opinion matters when you discuss it properly. When you say why.